Hi, I'm David Brown with Hill Cumorah Expedition Team. This is presentation number 15, which is on the esoteric lessons along the Avenue of the Dead. When an architect puts together a design for a building or a series of buildings that are related to one another, he puts into consideration their size, the shapes, the numbers of steps, the distance, the up and down, all of the aspects that can give clues as to a belief system or a particular way of viewing the structures. There is no written language at Teotihuacan. There are no murals with writing. There are no huge panels that have glyph blocks on them. All we have is a design. And embedded in that design is a belief system that is waiting to be unlocked, that is waiting to be deciphered. All it takes is the right code to decipher it. And we believe we have actually stumbled on, unexpectedly, that code, which is the night event that is the Bethlehem Star, the Book of Mormon prophecy that is the day, night, and day as if it were no night, and that preceded Christ's birth, the concepts of the cosmology of the world, the fact that it was created spiritually first and then physically. All of these things we have found at Teotihuacan. But that's not the only thing. Now we find that if you walk the Avenue of the Dead, it is a teaching tool on how we walk through this life. We can walk through the plane of the four directions, but if we want to go from below to above, then there is a particular pathway we need to walk. And this is demonstrating it. I'm excited to share this with you because it is amazing how everything fits in place as you walk along. So, presentation number 15, the esoteric lessons that are taught on the Avenue of the Dead. Teotihuacan is one of the most famous ruins in the Western Hemisphere. It is not a Book of Mormon city. However, it was built by people who were descendants of the Jaredite culture, which we have identified as the Olmec. Just as a reminder of what we have found and how we're interpreting the Avenue of the Dead and all the structures along there, beginning at the very top, the Pyramid of the Moon, we believe, is representing Jupiter. The Plaza of the Moon, with its ring of altars, we believe is representing Saturn. The Temple of the Sun, we believe, is representing the Moon and its travel. The Avenue of the Dead is actually a conjunction timeline. The San Juan Canal is the horizon between the Earth and all the events that are happening in the night sky. Everything north of the San Juan Canal is the night sky. The Citadel of Quetzalcoatl is a representation of the Earth and its cosmology, how it's built, how it's structured, and so on. And then the Temple of Quetzalcoatl is a representation of the Christ child. So what we've already gone through all of those aspects and given our argument for why they are the way we are interpreting them. But let's review real quick the Citadel of Quetzalcoatl. Because here we see that on the right, which is the east, is the number 3 that begins all things. It is the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. They three, acting as one, create all of what we understand as creation. And therefore, we believe, as we have talked about, because the orientation of the citadel of Quetzalcoatl at 16.5 degrees south of east coincides with the rising of Sirius. And all of the Egyptian parallels of Sirius representing Isis, who gave birth to Horus and Christ being a parallel of one another. We believe that this temple is Christ, and all of the artwork on that temple is displaying a belief system of a birth having to do with an Egyptian icon of the goddess Tararet, who is a birthing goddess, who's giving birth, and then the combination of artistic features that are put onto the serpent heads all around the structure. And that serpent head has the features that infer the cardinal direction constellations that are in the night sky at the time that Christ is born. So all of that is on Christ's structure. Not only that, it is the most ornate, elaborate structure on the site. And then, oddly enough, within about 50 years after it was built, they completely covered it over. Why would the builders build such a beautiful, ornate building and then cover it up? We believe that that is symbolic of the fact that Christ, as wonderful and glorious he is our God, as wonderful and glorious as he is, when he was born into our world, we didn't recognize him for what he was. He was born plain. He was born in a manger. He wasn't born into a kingly bed. There was no display of who he was at the time of his birth. And that's why they covered up this temple, because that's how Christ came into our physical realm. He came in with his true identity hidden from us. And so that is another argument for why this particular structure represents Christ. Everything on the right-hand side of this line of demarcation has all kinds of rooms that are there in that plaza area around the Temple of Quetzalcoatl. We believe that that is an allusion to what Christ said about, "In my Father's house are many mansions." This is the spiritual creation. This is his Father's house on the right-hand side of that line. And in his Father's house are many mansions. Then we postulate that that second apron is actually indicative of Christ's birth into the physical, because everything to the left of that line is physical creation. And it is on a much grander scale than we had ever considered before. It is the galactic year. It is the zodiac ages in its entirety. It's representing 26,000 year cycle. And because of the placement of those particular ages, which were given the clues by the ones that are on the western berm, it indicates that Christ was born between Virgo and Libra. However, not in the galactic year, that's in the solar year, the annual zodiac pathway, which means that Christ, this birthing process, took place somewhere between August 22nd and October 22nd. And that's exactly what we discovered with the Avenue of the Dead and the position of the Temple of the Sun, indicating that it was actually September 9th that Christ was born. So even the placement of this between Libra and Virgo is important. Not only that, Libra, the virtue that's taught by Libra is justice. or equality. The virtue taught by Virgo is innocence, mercy. And so Christ is born between mercy and justice. And those are the things that he brought to our world, mercy and justice. And then we've discovered over on the far west, the 4 altars that are facing away from the center. They've turned away from honoring creation, and they are facing west. West is where the sun goes down, and so that is where things go dark. And it is actually the death of light. And so man is facing death. And we have determined that Taurus, Aries, Pisces, and Aquarius are going from south to north because the progression on this entire site is to the north, from the south to the north. And therefore, Taurus is at the southernmost point, Aquarius at the northernmost, which indicates that Christ was born between Aries and Pisces. And we know that. We know that if he was born on the triple conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, that is the herald event that closed out the age of Aries and heralded the opening of the age of Pisces. So he entered into the avenue of the dead during that time. So also notice here that we have all 12 of the galactic ages represented around this, this open plaza. This is important because as it is in the beginning, so shall it be in the end, and we'll see this displayed again. So this is the context that we've set. This is the beginning of how things were formed and why things were put into motion. This is theology. This is cosmology right here at the citadel of Quetzalcoatl. But now we're going to get a lesson of how to walk our individual life. We have discovered that the structures on this site also provide an esoteric teaching that will assist the Christian in understanding the various aspects of his sacred journey. We will begin this journey by exiting the citadel of Quetzalcoatl and entering the avenue of the dead. And we believe that what this is indicating is this is conception, not birth. This is conception coming out of the structure of the cosmology and the purposes for why a life must be lived. It begins at conception. When you cross over the San Juan Canal, that is birth. That's being born into the physical journey. Walking up the Avenue of the Dead south of the Temple of the Sun is emblematic of our physical journey. The Temple of the Sun is actually Christ. And we'll see that and why that is. And then we finish out the rest of the journey as a spiritual journey. There is a building that represents death and resurrection. And then we come to a point of judgment. And then at the Temple of the Moon, which is the very north end of the Avenue of the Dead, we enter into eternity. So from the south, we enter into the physical walk of this world. And in the north, we enter back into eternity. Entering into the Avenue of the Dead, coming down from the steps that are at the Citadel of Quetzalcoatl, this is the view. Looking north, we see the Pyramid of the Moon at the end of the road. And here we are on the road, and we can see very clearly our destination at the end of the road. It is where we hope to end up. Along that way, we cross over the San Juan Canal. And this is important because it is implying that metamorphosis the Maya held and regarded as sacred, which is from a tadpole to a frog. When we are in the womb, we are a water-breathing and water-borne individual. A tadpole is water-breathing and waterborne. At birth, we become an air-breathing and earth-bound creature. And when a tadpole transforms, it goes through the metamorphosis, it becomes an air-breathing and earth-bound creature. So as we go up the Avenue of the Dead, we can still, once we were born into this life, we've crossed over the San Juan Canal, we can see the end of the road. Things look pretty good. And then it gets to a point where we get close to that first wall that I talked about that crosses the Avenue of the Dead. And we've lost sight of the end of the road. And it takes a conscious effort to walk up the steps, to elevate oneself, and finally catch a glimpse again of what's at the end of the road and be reminded with that view that that's where we're supposed to be going. And so we go down the wall and we go back into the plaza, and about halfway through the plaza, as we're moving northward, we lose sight of the structure at the end of the road. And again, we find ourselves at a wall. We have to make the conscious effort to walk up that wall and elevate ourselves to the point where we catch a glimpse again and be reminded again of what is at the end of the road. And this goes on and on through 5 plazas. We believe that this is symbolic of the physical journey that we're in, especially early in life, as our spirits are getting used to the physical frame that we're in and the senses that we have to deal with. We believe that the 5 plazas allude to the 5 senses, the walk through the 5 senses, the sense of sound, the sense of smell, of touch, of sight, and of taste, any one of which, or any combination of which, if we get too engrossed in the passion of our senses, then we lose sight of what's at the end of the road. And therefore, that first several years of life is a lot of up and down. It's a roller coaster ride because we get caught up in the sensual aspect, and then we lose sight of what life is about, and we have to make a conscious effort to raise ourselves up again, to elevate and catch a glimpse again of what's down the road, of where we're supposed to be going. And then we begin to see, on that pathway, we begin to see that there's a larger concept that's looming on our right. Anything that happens with our right hand or on the right side is emblematic of intentional thought, purpose, and effort. Anything that's on the left is the consequence of our intentions. And the consequence may be intended or unintended, but it is a consequence nonetheless of our intention. The right is our intention and what we're faithful to. So over on the right, we have looming this very large structure that's indicating some kind of intentional something that is trying to capture our attention. And then we come up and finally come over that last wall, and now we have a clear view of the rest of the Avenue of the Dead. But when we turn to the right, we see this structure in front of us. It is the Temple of the Sun. This particular photograph was taken on the spring equinox at about 11:30 or noon, and you can see that the intentional building here, the construction was to cast shadows. And what you see here is the shadow of a cross. The designers intentionally did this. The point where our life stops its roller coaster ride of through the passions, up and down, wondering, feeling like we know what life is, and then losing sight of it because a particular sensuality has captured us, and we have to make a conscious effort to elevate ourselves and catch a glimpse of the end of the road. All that is left behind when we stand in front of the cross and understand what Christ did on that cross. And the beautiful implication here is that if you want to elevate yourself to the high point that you can have a view, an understanding of all that came before and all that is yet to come, then you have to elevate yourself by walking the pathway of the cross. The stairs are the pathway of the cross. And so here it is, the emblem of Jesus Christ on the temple that represents the moon, which is what Jesus did. He reflected God's will into our life. And it's a beautiful example of how they designed the structure to tell a story. Here we are in front of the cross. And once we come to grips with what the cross is about, then the view the rest of the way through our life is very different. There's no more ups and downs and getting caught up in the roller coaster rides. Now we see clearly the end of the road, and our walk is a spiritual walk. We're no longer tied down by the physical aspects of life. Now it is a spiritual walk. And that takes us then to the end of the road. Notice at the end of the road, we have actually the very large Temple of the Moon on the northernmost part. But then in the Plaza of the Moon, there are these structures that we believe is a representation, again, of the constellations and the galactic year. There are 12 structures, at least the foundations of 12 structures. And we believe that this is the order that they should be in. Why? Because the 4 that are against the Avenue of the Dead are in a straight line. They're not in a semicircle. They are a straight line. And if these, therefore, are the ages of man represented, notice how all of the altars now are facing the center. They're all the stairways are facing to the center. Man has turned his life around. So let's take a look at this a little bit closer. I want to show you how this looks from the top of the Temple of the Sun. Looking across the complex, you can see how beautiful and complete all of those structures are. There are 4 levels up on every one of them, which indicates 4 is physical creation. But notice how these 4 that represent the ages of man are not complete. Taurus is complete. Aries is missing the capstones. Pisces is missing the top level. And Aquarius, over to the right, is missing even more, like the top 2 levels. Why is that? We believe the implication in this design is because at the time that this was built, which is at the beginning of the age of Pisces, at that time, The age of Taurus was complete, and the history was written on Taurus. Everything that was initiated and everything that was decided and lived at that time frame has been written in the books, and the consequences of all those things had been written in the books. But Aries was just closing out. And while the foundations had been laid and the lives had been lived, the capstones are missing because the results or the consequences of those lives lived had not been fully comprehended yet. And so the capstones are missing on Aries. You get to Pisces and the foundations are laid, but instead of 4 levels, there's only 3. That's because the life of Pisces has yet to be lived. It isn't complete at all because it's not even begun. It's only begun at this point. And then when we come around to Aquarius, there's even less. You have the foundations laid, but you're missing the top 2 levels, which is indicating that there is even less defined yet about Aquarius and how it's going to be lived. So even the incompleteness of some of these structures is fitting into the concept that the 12 structures are representing the galactic ages, and that the ones that are there coming from the south to the north against the Avenue of the Dead, those are the ages of men, the ones that are in a straight line. Now, there's something else to notice here. When you get at the end of Aquarius, the stairway of Aquarius is interrupted by the stairway of this other building that I have circled here over on the left. That is what the archaeologists refer to as a priestly complex, that this is where the priests resided. And that's because of the subject matter that is found here. There are images of eagles and owls, and it's called the Temple of the Butterflies. This is the second metamorphosis that the Maya considered sacred, which is the concept of the caterpillar, which is an earthbound creature who goes into a chrysalis and then emerges as an airborne creature. And we believe that what's being conveyed here is the same concept that Paul gives us out of 1 Corinthians. In the 15th chapter, "Behold, I show you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the sound of the last trump. For the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. For this corruptible must put on incorruption, and this mortal must put on immortality. So when this corruptible shall have put on incorruption, and this mortal shall have put on immortality, then shall be brought to pass the saying that is written, Death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory? The sting of death is sin, and the strength of sin is the law. But thanks be to God, which giveth us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ." So, illustrated here is the fact that this Temple of the Butterflies, this metamorphosis change from an earthbound creature to an airborne creature, is located right there at the end of the age of man, at the point where all things are restored back to its spiritual creation as in the beginning in the Garden of Eden. And the Temple of the Butterflies actually wraps around the altar that represents Capricorn, and it comes back into the plaza of the moon in between Capricorn and Sagittarius. Capricorn, again, is the half man, half ram, which indicates that this whole process involves a ram, the man who was the ram, who is reconciling us back to our original forms. And you talk about the sting of death is the law. When we enter into this final part of coming into judgment, we enter into that judgment place between the altars that represent Libra and Virgo. The symbols for Libra and Virgo are the scales and the Virgin. And the virtues are justice and innocence and mercy. So we will enter into eternity either through justice or innocence and mercy. Notice that innocence and mercy is on the right. Notice that justice is on the left. Justice is always the byproduct of the things that we do. And the sting of death is the law. Our victory is through the Lord Jesus Christ, who gives us mercy. We need to have mercy. Notice how the steps on the apron of the Temple of the Moon aren't completely in the middle of the upper steps. The upper steps are shifted a little bit, and it gives the impression that the rampart on the right and of both the lower and the upper are in a straight line. This is intended. The whole concept here is when you're entering into eternity, you want to be leaning to the right. You want to be leaning to innocence and mercy. You don't want justice. You want to go to the side of mercy. Even Ecclesiastes says, a wise man's heart is at his right hand, but a fool's heart at his left. Make what you do intentional for innocence and mercy. If you extend mercy, you will receive mercy. This particular feature is located at the base of the altars that we've identified as Libra and Virgo. And it's in front of the steps to the Temple of the Moon, which we believe is judgment and entering into eternity. This particular feature demonstrates and marks the northernmost and southernmost rising and setting of all planets. And so the whole concept here is that the orbiting of all the world is all being brought in together here at this point. This is the point where all creation is brought before its God to be judged. And we will be judged based on how we overcame the walk of five senses. Notice that there are 5 levels to this apron. The first set of steps that you go up, and those are steep steps, and those are large steps. This is a difficult thing to do for a person to walk up these steps. Well, judgment is difficult. Seeing yourself for who you really are is difficult. But we will be judged by how we overcame our walk in the 5 senses. And then, when we are judged, which is being represented here on the top of the apron on the left-hand side of this photo, once we are judged, we will enter into one of 3 glories, we're told, either into the telestial, or the terrestrial, or the celestial. Notice how judgment and the walk through the 5 senses, which is represented by the 5 tiers, that the top of that apron is level with the top of the terrestrial facade there, which indicates that if you're a good person, if you elevated yourself above the 5 senses, then the terrestrial is the level that you'll be on. But for those who went above and beyond, there is the celestial glory. So this facade on the pyramid of the moon is illustrating judgment and then the assignment to the glories. So this is amazing to me. One other thing that I want to point out to you is a relationship that is embedded down in the research that we came across, but to me it is so profound. I want to share it with you. When we look at the pyramid of the sun and we run a diagonal through opposing corners, it creates an X. But that X is not where we expect it to be. It is not on top of the apex of the pyramid. And so I got to looking at a profile of the pyramid, and here is the length from front to back, and putting a line on the midpoint of that. The midpoint, the center of the pyramid, is not where the apex of the pyramid is located. That top portion is shifted about 40 feet to the east, or to our right on this photograph. Why is that? What's going on? Well, what we found is in our research that where the center of the pyramid is at its base, there is the end of the tunnel that goes underneath the pyramid of the sun. The end of that tunnel is in a cloverleaf formation, which is a quetzal flower, which is associated with Christ. So the concept here is that this tunnel, this hidden tunnel beneath, ends in a tomb. And if we go from where that X is on the temple of the sun and take a line directly north, cardinal north, and then we draw a line on the center line of the Avenue of the Dead, those two lines intersect on the back side of the Temple of the Moon. And the way that we interpret this is that man's journey through life is skewed, but Christ went into the tomb for the straight and narrow purpose that our pathway will intersect with his pathway in eternity. Christ went into the tomb and resurrected for us so that we could meet in eternity and spend eternity together. We've gone through this pathway, this journey up the Avenue of the Dead, from conception to birth, through the roller coaster ride of the physical journey, to coming face to face with Christ and who he is and what he did on the cross, what he accomplished for us on the cross, so that when we finally come to death, that we might be resurrected, and that our judgment before our God will be one that leans to the right towards mercy, and that we might enter into eternity with him. We believe that the people of Teotihuacan used this site for multiple purposes. It embedded a testimony of Christ on a scale that was so large that it could not be comprehended or destroyed by invading armies. It's the only way that it lasted this long. They made it so large, no one would expend the energy to tear it down. While at the same time, it served as an esoteric teaching tool for successive generations. Therefore, we have demonstrated the following. Teotihuacan is a star chart whose primary orientations mark a certain night and time, specifically sunset of September 8th, 7 BC to 1:11 a.m. September 9th, 7 BC. And number two, that the citadel of Quetzalcoatl alludes to Hebrew cosmology mixed with Egyptian religious icons and further affirms the tribe of Joseph perspective. And number 3, the layout of the citadel of Quetzalcoatl and the concepts embedded in the walk along the Avenue of the Dead teach a religious belief consistent with Judeo-Christian theology. The ancient people of Mesoamerica believed in and testified of the birth of a Messiah. In Nahuatl, Teotihuacan means city of the gods. Some say it is better described as the birthplace of the gods. We believe that the original meaning of the name for Teotihuacan is the place that marks the birth of our God. So this concludes presentation 15 on the esoteric lessons of the Avenue of the Dead. We don't have the luxury of language at this location. The language that's being used is architecture, mathematics, and having the right belief code to decipher unlocks an amazing understanding. By having an understanding of the teachings of life after death, of Hebrew cosmology, Hebrew theology, what the scriptures unlock for us as far as a spiritual creation, followed then by a physical creation and the fall of man, and then the way that he can be restored back to God with a promise of resurrection and then a judgment and eternal life. I mean, this can't be here by accident. All of these designs are intentional and unlockable. They are knowable if we have the right knowledge to unlock it. And we believe that we have been blessed enough to be able to see what's actually embedded here. And I hope that we've been able to convey that understanding to you, and that you also are impressed with what our ancient brothers and sisters did in building this particular structure and providing for us an affirmation that the gospel, in the way that we have it today, has always been taught this way. And God is constantly making efforts to bring us to him in a very personal way. Our last presentation, presentation 16, is the next one. And it is on the fact that this structure and so many others were built in the Golden Age at a time when there were no more ites. Hope to see you presentation 16. Thank you.